Since I've talked about Disney's first cartoon recently, Amphilia, it's time to discuss the first episode of The Owl House that premiered last year. Yeah, it's really astounding that I'm actually reviewing two cartoons that were from Disney of our networks. But then again, I guess a lot of unpredictability can happen when it comes to your interest into other things that aren't from Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. But I think that's probably a good thing if a cartoon like The Owl House and Amphibia is actually original compared to doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm referring to the cartoons in Nickelodeon. This episode, A Lion Witch in the Warden, gives us the introduction of Luce, who is the weirdo in her school. And this episode is mainly discussing that just because you're a weirdo doesn't mean you have to be a different, better person. Which is a more that they keep hammering in constantly, but I'm gonna get to that later. So anyway, her mother wants her daughter to go to summer camp in order to change herself for the better. Because we get to see a mini montage or flashbacks of Luce and her imagination completely going into her head too much. Because in the tryouts of auditions, she completely used sausages to whip, as in inside her human body, to be whipped off, which completely scared so many students. Not to mention that in the next flashbacks, she completely had insects completely going all over the place, which completely scares so many people. And the final bit, which I think just showing you this image will probably explain everything. But before she waits for the bus that takes her to summer camp, she completely saw an owl that was stealing her book that she's been reading throughout her times in high school. So she chases the owl off, which leads her to a portal that takes her to the Boiling Isles. And I have to say, considering that this is the introduction, we get to see the Boiling Isles in the first 4 minutes of this episode, people are going to instantly say that the episode is mostly rushed. I would completely disagree with you on that, but at the same time, this episode isn't 44 minutes long, so I don't think that the people who worked on this episode didn't really have the time in order to make the first episode really paced out well. But at the same time, not every premiere needs to be 44 minutes or an hour long in order to make a good impression. But I'm gonna get to my opinions on that eventually. We then get the introduction of Etna, who is the wanted witch of the Borean Isles, after completely doing scams and completely breaking the laws in the Borean Isles. You may think that she's a really hateable character, but the more you completely see her of her motivations and her personality, she isn't like Eddie from the Ed and Eddie cartoon. Well, Eddie gets flanderized, but at the same time, this is the first season, and as of now, the second season is possibly airing. So I honestly think that we're just gonna have to expect what's happening in the later seasons if the flanderization does happen to Edna. But anyway, she takes Luce to the Owl House from where she lives. Luce desperately wants to head back home because she just isn't suitable for what's going on in the Boiling Isles, especially how dangerous it is. However, Edna wants her to go on a mission to get Kane's crown, who is the tiny demon in this episode, so that he can have her head back home to where she belongs. When Luce heads to the prison of where Kane's crown is located, she also encounters Warden, who is one of Edna's ex-boyfriends. Yeah, with the title of a Lion Witch in the Warden, it really goes to show that Edna is truly a criminal and how she has to deal with the same routine every single time she encounters Warden. But I think I discussed the story as much as it is. For my first positive critique I can say about this show is that this is the very first cartoon of the 2020s decade. Granted, they completely made plans on making a second season in November of 2019, but at the same time, it doesn't change my opinions that this is the very first cartoon of this decade. And that is really saying something, considering that for what we had in the 2010s, I can say that the 2020s has a really good start compared to what the other cartoons had in the 2010s. Granted, Adventure Time and Regular Show was a good start, but I consider this the Adventure Time of the 2020s, since that this is the first cartoon of this decade. I'm just gonna point out right now, for this being the first episode of the Owl House, not every other pilot episode has to be 44 minutes long in order to make a good impression. I will admit that the pacing is way too fast in order to actually see some investment from the other characters, but the more I remember it, other cartoons that gave us introduction of characters immediately and how the pacing is like, it really doesn't need to make the episode much longer in order to make an impression. I can really tell that they really have plans ahead of time in order to actually make the 31st season really fleshed out and way more paced out in order to make the episode a lot more better. But at the same time, I still think that this first episode of the Owl House is a really good introduction, despite being rushly paced. For what this episode had from beginning to end, I still enjoy it no matter what, and after rewatching this episode to review it, I can say that they really did a good job on showing what the boring Isles is like and the world that Liz has to deal with, since that she decides to stay here and actually pretend that she was actually in summer camp by texting to her mother. Granted that she learns a lesson on, despite being a weirdo, you can still accept in the society that you're in. But considering that this is one of the earlier episodes and this is the first season of the Owl House, there's going to be a lot more development in the later seasons. So I can say that once we get more of season 2 and more of the later seasons, we're going to see a lot more development involving Luce. And this isn't a sitcom where we completely know that each sitcom show gets 4 seasons each. There's going to be a lot more seasons involving the Owl House in the later years of this decade, which will probably be a good thing, since that we can get to see more development of Luce and the other characters. Besides, I still like all the introductions of all the characters, mainly the 3. Luce being a self-absorbed character is something I don't expect the main character to be. I mean, throughout my times watching new cartoons involving the main characters, consider that they were younger, I can tell that their behavior is going to be like that, but Luce is a teenager, so whenever I actually see her on screen, especially on interactions with the other characters, she does do some really great moments, but also really humorous moments, especially her interactions with the monsters around her. Seriously, she reacts, and she is fully aware that she isn't this self-absorbed once she enters Borean Isles, except when she released the prisoners and gave them her speech about you should accept who you are. Yes, the message has been hammered in, but at the same time, I honestly think that for Luce's decision of staying in the Borean Isles instead of just heading back to the real world to go to summer camp could be easily a lesson that she's going to learn on trying to fit in with the society in her world while understanding of what people felt in the Borean Isles. Because as far as I'm concerned, seeing Warden just want Edna to go on a date with him really goes to show the awkwardness of what the world of the Borean Isles is. Believe me, considering that this is mainly monster and mostly Halloween theme, you should probably expect that it shouldn't be as scary as what other specials involving Halloween used to be. Granted, it is kind of interesting to actually expect what this show is trying to do in order to be its own thing, but considering how awkward it is, that really goes to show that it does have an identity of its own. As for the action sequence with Luce and the others just trying to take down Warden, I can say it's really entertaining, especially for the first action sequence in this show. Especially when you completely have different kinds of monsters completely taking down a very giant monster with different abilities. And believe me, there's gonna be so many different creatures in the show that you're gonna be really amazed once you see Luce and the other characters face them off. If I do have some nitpicks involving this show, it will have to be the world of the Borean Isles. I'm not saying that it's generic, but at the same time, I honestly think that the monsters, despite being unique, don't usually fit in the world of the Owl House. Yes, I am aware that this is a cartoon, and this is, well, you have to make a first impression of the world building that they created, but at the same time, just by looking at the location itself involving the Borean Isles, it's basically the same world that Luce lives in, except that those monsters and vampires. Which I do admit that it's something that you need to be accustomed to in order to understand the world building, but at the same time, I can say that there were different world buildings in other cartoons that did much more attention to detail than this episode. I'm not saying that this world is bad or generic, I just think that there were other worlds that have done much more better than this. But then again, that's just a nitpick. But by the time of this recording, I've only watched the first half of the first season, so I can say that once we reach into more episodes, the world building will be more improved. And I will say that the forest, along with the different liquid lakes or rivers, is probably the best parts of the Borean Isles. So that I can give the background that credit alone. So anyway, that's basically my review of the premiere of the Owl House. Granted, there's gonna be more episodes that's gonna be discussed, but at the same time, I don't want to pressure myself. Yes, similar to Amphibia, I'm gonna be taking my time watching this cartoon before I make more reviews of it. But I will review one episode per month once we reach to the next month. And possibly I might do a dedicated week of reviewing 5 episodes from this show. But again, I need to have a lot of knowledge about this show more than I do right now. So it's gonna take more time. All in all, the Owl House being the first 2020s cartoon is a great way to start off, especially for the decade of cartoon animation, or animation in general. I give this episode an 8 out of 10. Could have been much more higher, but at the same time, I can still consider it a really solid premiere for a show that is from Disney Channel.